Thanks for downloading a 3CR podcast. 3CR is an independent community radio station based in Melbourne, Australia. We need your financial support to keep going. Go to www.3cr.org.au for more information and to donate online. Now stay tuned for your 3CR podcast.
But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
And the aliens with mind meld and give them the technology. They're bad aliens. So are you surprised that Nazis were influenced by demons?
No, if demons are real, I would definitely think they'd be on the side of the Nazis.
Yeah.
McDonald's is connected to the Clintons. They chop up the bodies and put them into the sausage and hamburgers. People are being cannibalized. Look it up.
And I'm watching CNN talk about this as violent white nationalist protests. We have done everything in our power to keep this peaceful, you know?
It's Pepe's become kind of a symbol.
Good afternoon, gentle listeners. You're listening to Yeah Nah Pasaran, a show about fascism and its gravediggers. I'm Cam Smith.
I'm Andy Fleming.
And this week we are joined by our correspondent from Trump's America, Jason Wilson. Thanks for joining us, Jason.
Happy as always to be here.
Now, Jason, little half mention in the New York Times the other day. So you've been in the New York Times. I've been in the New York Times. Andy, ever been in the New York Times?
No, Cam, I've never been in the New York Times.
When were you in the New York Times, Cam?
I will say, no need for anyone to look it up. Just rest assured that I was, but we don't need to go into it. Jason, bit of a strange one. You were added as an afterthought by a bit of some cheekiness was going on regarding eugenics. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened?
Well, yeah, a very strange. I mean, I would actually say I pointedly was not mentioned, nor was the relevant story. But we can quibble about that. But yeah, it was to do with the story that they did about Zoran Mamdani, who recently won the Democratic primary in the New York mayoral race. And as your listeners will probably know, you know, New York City is a Democratic voting city. So once you've won the Democratic primary, you're pretty much very much on the inside track to win the mayoralty, right? The mayoral election. Unfortunately, for the New York Times and for many others in the more centrist establishment, Zoran Mamdani is a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, and he's proposing some very mildly redistributive policies to the extent that mayors are capable of making such policies. So it's things like free buses, you know, freezing rents in rent-controlled buildings that the current mayor had allowed to incrementally rise, and, you know, a policy about state-owned food stores, which are not. They've been presented as some takeover of the grocery business, or they're going to be competing directly with bodegas, the beloved corner stores they have there in New York City. Without getting into it, that's not really true. But these are very, as I said, mildly redistributive policies, really just targeted at making life a little bit easier for lower income people in one of the most expensive cities in the world. And the freak out the New York Times obviously is published in New York, but it's also a national outlet. And the freak out over this guy has gone national. He's a South Asian American. And when he was young, they moved to the United States from Uganda, which was a country where they used to, once upon a time, where a lot of South Asian people, some of whom were expelled by the dictator Idi Amin. There's a complicated history there and a complicated life history with him and his dad as well. His dad had been back and forth, and he's also a Muslim. So lots of things to freak out about for centrist people and white people. Also, he's someone who has expressed pro-Palestinian sentiments. So lots to worry about there, obviously, for Zionists in the centrist establishment, of which there are many. So, yeah, there's been a freak out over this guy, and the New York Times is clearly out to get him, I would say, you know, and this week has probably been the last nail in the coffin of whatever ambitions I ever had to get anything in the New York Times, right? But that's okay. They've been flipping out about this guy, and they unwisely, I think in retrospect, although they don't seem to think so, ran a story which was about his application to Columbia University in New York City. Columbia University is a prestigious university, but it's also one that has been associated, especially since the 1960s, with activism, with left-wing politics, with protest movements, including the pro-Palestine protests that happened in 2023, 2024, and it's actually been singled out by the Trump administration on that basis. But Zohran Mamdani didn't actually go to Columbia, but this is about his application to Columbia when he was 18, and he actually went to, I don't know how to say this, I think they pronounce it Bowdoin College, which is a little liberal arts school. Anyway, they ran a story based upon his application to go to college when he was 18, in which he had ticked the boxes saying that he was African American and that he was Asian. Now, as I said, the guy came from Uganda. He is South Asian. I mean, ultimately, those boxes that you tick are basically derived from the racial categories set out by the US Census, which are the same racial categories that US law attempts to use in creating some equity or used to anyway, in education and elsewhere. But this was presented as a scandal of some kind. It was framed as a scandal of some kind where he was maybe like that Rachel DeLisle character from Spokane, Washington, who identified as black or whatever and wasn't. I don't know if you remember that story from the way back from 2014, 2015. But it was presented as this scandal. And to me, it just seemed like, I don't know, someone who was trying to answer a question honestly in the face of the pretty crude totalizing racial categories that US law sets out. But anyway, I mean, maybe he was trying to gain illegitimate entry into Columbia University, where his dad was also a professor at the time. He says he didn't really want to go there, and he didn't go there. So it didn't work in any case. And the reality seems messy, complicated, and possibly quite innocent, and also a long time ago, done when he was really young, completely irrelevant to the governance of New York City. It didn't happen. As I said, he didn't wind up going to Columbia. But the New York Times presented this as some scandalous information. And the reason that they were able to report on his admissions application to Columbia University was that a few months back, somebody hacked into Columbia's admissions system, their database. The information from that hack had been relentlessly flogged online by this identity on X and Substack who goes by the name of Cremio, who has been getting information from this hack purporting to show that white people, or particularly Asian people, had effectively been discriminated against by Columbia's practice of trying to affirmative action and admitting more black students, Hispanic students, right? This is a claim that you'll find on the far right a lot, that affirmative action processes in college admissions systematically discriminate against the groups who aren't favored by affirmative action. And also, this Cremio character has been making the claim that there was a Supreme Court ruling last year, I believe, that struck down affirmative action as unconstitutional discrimination, racial discrimination, and told colleges to stop doing it. And he's purporting to show that they're still carrying out these affirmative action policies even in the face of this Supreme Court decision. Now, they sourced it to this guy's, online alias, let's say. Unfortunately, in a story that I did about a conference down in Austin, Texas, which is a pronatalism conference that was stuffed to the gills with eugenicists and scientific racists and just far-right ne'er-do-wells of all stripes. And that's what I was reporting. But as part of that story, I was able to confirm, because it had been out on blogs and social media a little, but I was able to substantiate the allegation that this Cremio character was in fact Jordan Lasker. And Jordan Lasker is, it appears now that he's crashed out of a PhD program at Texas Tech University, I believe. Previously, he had been engaged in some postgraduate work at the University of Minnesota, I believe. And he's also been the co-author on a number of papers in the fake vanity journals that people like Emil Kierkegaard and others run in order to give this patina of legitimacy to basically scientific racist research, like skull measuring, IQ, race and IQ type research, right? And he was also a co-author on a paper that got a professor, Brian Pester, at a university in Ohio, a tenured professor, fired because of their misuse of genetic data that the US government, the National Institutes of Health, had made available on strict conditions to researchers doing this genetic population research, right? They misused it to churn out this race and IQ type paper.
No skull measuring stuff with this data. And then they measured all the skulls.
I mean, what these guys are obsessed with showing is two things. Currently, they've always been obsessed with the idea that black people, people with sub-Saharan African descent in particular, have a lower IQ than whites, Asian people, Ashkenazi Jews, and that's a matter of biology and heredity. Okay, and if they can show that, and this was the thing that powered arguments by the likes of Charles Murray earlier on in his book The Bell Curve. He explicitly made this case that if you can show that this is just a matter of biology, right? That black people's IQs are lower than white people's IQs, right? And maybe that's also tied in with a greater propensity to criminal behavior. If you can show all that, then the social policy that aims to offer some redress to the brutal history of slavery and racial discrimination and Jim Crow and all the rest of it, that social policy is useless. You're not going to get the outcomes you want because these people are just congenitally less intelligent and less capable of operating in a modern society than whites are. It's got nothing to do with that history of racism, right? Like, so that's one thing. The other thing they're doing at the moment is Pesta had come up in a story, collaborated on reporting on with a bunch of UK Guardian journalists, and that involved some misuse and unauthorized access to biobank data in the UK, as well as them setting up, other people in this milieu setting up a company in the United States that was offering, or the plans to offer people the opportunity to screen embryos at a particular point in the IVF process, to screen those embryos for the genetic markers for IQ. And by the way, I mean, in the course of that reporting, that practice would be illegal in the UK and in Australia and a bunch of other countries. The US is less regulated. And by the way, I mean, scientists we talked to in the course of that reporting were skeptical that it would even work, right? But I mean, so it's not even clear that the product that they're developing is going to be particularly useful. But there's very little regulation around this stuff in the US. And so they're hoping to sell this idea of IQ screening, which they're premising on population level genetic data to sell this as a product. And he's in that milieu. I'm not saying that he directly works for that company, but this is the network that he's a part of. And if you look at the guy's Substack and X.com everything app output, he's just the most crude and vulgar scientific racist, like that belief system, right? Some races are more intelligent than others, and that racist stereotypes reflect reality. That, you know, Jews in particular, Ashkenazi Jews in particular, have a higher IQ, which that can also, it sounds like a compliment or something, but that can also feed into anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about Jews pulling the strings, especially on things like immigration policy, right? Anyway, it's a racist belief system that he spends every waking hour trying to promote. And this was their source for Zoran Mamdani's admissions data, because he has a hold of this Columbia admissions data. Now, I'm not saying he hacked it. He says he didn't. He got it from someone else. I don't know who hacked it, but he's the main repository for this hacked data, and they actually credited him in the story. And I guess people took exception to that. They took exception to the entire framing and tenor of this story. They took exception to, I guess, the obvious bias that would lead you to framing a story in that way about a mayoral candidate, especially for the newspaper that refused to publish any substantive stories on the details of a leaked vetting dossier for J.D. Vance that came out during the campaign, partly because of suspicions that had been accessed by Iranian hackers or something like that. You know? So people took exception to that inconsistency, but people also took exception to the fact that they continued to grant this guy anonymity, even though his name was already on the public record. They went back after the story was published and added a line saying something like he's an academic who has published work on race and IQ, which is something of an understatement, but they still didn't acknowledge that his name was on the public record. Various senior editors at the New York Times went online to mount these elaborate defenses of the story. But really, I mean, it's a bit of a disaster. And subsequently, Semaphore, which is an online newsletter type publication, had inside information from the New York Times, which they published, saying that the reason that they rushed this story out without the usual safeguards is that they were afraid they were going to be scooped by Christopher Rufo, who is a far-right activist who I've also written a bunch of stories on, who runs a Substack newsletter, right? They were afraid of being scooped by this far-right activist with a Substack newsletter. A far-right activist who they've never really subjected to serious scrutiny. In fact, they've given glowing and very helpful profiles of, and that's about it. So altogether, the impression one goes away with is that the New York Times is subject to the agenda setting of, a bunch of race scientists and far-right activists who, Rufo, as far as I can tell, wants to repeal the Civil Rights Act and wants to roll back any gains that have been made on racial justice in the United States over the last few decades. And so this seems to be the folks who are setting the agenda of the New York Times. This is, at least in this coverage, whose tune they're dancing to. And that's, to me, that's the most disturbing thing. At the end of the day, I don't live in New York City. Mamdani's policies seem interesting. It would probably be great for more cities in the United States if they had mayors with that policy agenda. It might be good for people to see that those policies can work. But at the end of the day, that's up to New Yorkers. But the New York Times isn't simply a New York paper. It's a national and even a global institution, and they just seem a little too receptive, I suppose, to this stuff, these sources, and susceptible to seeing someone like Chris Rufo as a competitor of some kind rather than as an activist with an extremely explicit agenda, which is about rolling back progress on race that's been made.
Jason, it is remarkable that a Substacker and someone like Rufo can exercise such influence over the New York Times, but I guess outside of the mainstream, there's other attempts by the far right to influence the culture through publications. And a little while ago, you wrote about a group known as the Foundation Publishing Group, and what it's been up to. Can you briefly alert listeners as to what you discovered?
Yeah, so going even further back to last year, I identified an online personality who had been going by the Lomez as Jonathan Keeperman, who had formerly been a lecturer in the creative writing program at the University of California at Irvine, and was now, at the time I wrote back then, he had established this far-right publishing house, which published, as a lot of these far-right presses do, they publish public domain works by historical, fascist or reactionary authors, but also at that time he was publishing works by Steve Saylor, who's another race realist, human biodiversity guy who's been around for a really long time. He was publishing Curtis Yarvin, a collection based on his blog, Nick Land, and now he's publishing a collection by Taki Theodokropoulos. That's why we just call him Taki, was a Spectator columnist for a really long time, but had his own online publication called Taki's Mag. And so these anti-immigration, race realist authors, but they also claim to be trying to develop new talent on the far right. So they had run a writing competition once a year. They've stopped doing that now, but they have some newer authors. Frequently also those authors are pseudonymous, right? They use their online handles. And I returned to that and discovered that it had that operation had expanded into a science fiction imprint, into a homeschooling imprint, into I guess they're the main ones, along with Passage Press. Oh, and I don't know what to call this. It looks like a vanity press where maybe the authors subsidize some of the publication. Certainly that's a model that they had talked about. where the only publication so far is the Techno-Optimist Manifesto, written by a guy called Mark Andreessen, who's a Silicon Valley right-wing venture capitalist guy. And that document explicitly praises like Italian futurists who was proto-fascist in some ways. Anyway, so, and I identified another central figure in that, a guy called Daniel Lisi. And the interesting thing about Daniel Lisi was that he had previously run a poetry, I guess mostly a poetry imprint. He was in this LA literary scene. Dare I say it, a very woke LA literary scene. I mean, the people he was publishing were explicitly engaged with questions about feminism, about cultural identity, like non-minority cultural identities. So some of them were women with family origins in parts of Central America, and like really not only progressive left, but a lot of folks who were doing stuff that we might pejoratively be called identity politics, right? Reclamation or promotion of a marginal or subaltern cultural identity, as well as queer identity, right? And feminism, and even things like, which the far right really hates, like body positivity and sex positivity, right? Like the stable of poets they had were all along those lines. And he spent a long time in that world, and then a couple of years back seems to abruptly about-faced into running this publishing enterprise. Now, I couldn't put this in the newspaper, so we're breaking some news here. I couldn't put this in the newspaper because I couldn't get it to the point where I could say for certain that this was the case. But what I can say is one of the things that got me interested was the science fiction imprint that they've got, which is called Arc Press, right? A bunch of people in the science fiction fan space, including one guy who is like, I don't know if you remember, in the wake of Gamergate, something similar happened in science fiction. The sad puppies who were trying to game the Hugo Awards because the Hugo Awards had gone woke, and we're giving Hugo Awards to mostly really more literary science fiction, but often written by women of color, like people who weren't white guys and maybe had some progressive values embedded in them. These guys got upset about that. This was back 2014, starting in about 2014. And that became a movement of sorts, which still exists to an extent. People who want have a reactionary vision of science fiction going back to essentially white colonial narratives, more or less. Anyway, and so one of the people who had written about this comes from that movement, but others picked up on it. And the claim was that Arc Press was as a result of Peter Thiel wanting to fund a science fiction imprint when he couldn't buy an existing one that had that agenda as well. So I can't say that Thiel is funding Passage or that this whole enterprise, including Arc. I can't say that, but other people online say that, and you can easily find people saying that. So I don't know that that's true. I couldn't demonstrate that was true. It would be pretty hard to do so given the privacy, of course, that is afforded to people in private companies, and they don't have to disclose who their investors are, right, or anything like that. But the reason that interested me was because it just seemed believable that someone like that might be putting money into an explicitly reactionary cultural project, I guess. Now, how successful any of this has been is anyone's guess. I suspect less successful than it might appear. I don't know how many books they're selling. I know publishing is a very tough game. They have this strategy that this Daniel Lisi guy had set out in a self-published book that I bought and read, which had all of these ideas about how to sustain an independent publishing company. And part of that was like running events, which Passage certainly do. And Steve Saylor had a book tour that seemed to attract a lot of people, you know, to events in New York City and Chicago and Los Angeles. Rolling Stone the other day had an article that was a little bit too gentle for my tastes about the reactionary far-right literary scene that's emerged in LA, which is slightly off to one side of all of this, but certainly is related. And connected to what's going on here. But yeah, there seems to be a push for a reactionary cultural movement to, I guess, well, I wonder what problem a wealthy benefactor would be trying to solve with this. Perhaps the fact that youth culture or literary culture or culture on the whole has not tended to exhibit outspokenly reactionary politics for a really long time, and the worry that the right aren't capable of making art that inspires people or politicizes them in that way. I mean, you of all people, Andy, would be familiar with whatever, like neo-Nazi music scenes, right? Or shittier versions of this publishing company where maybe they're publishing public domain stuff by 19th century race scientists or whatever alongside maybe some newer stuff. I mean, there's a version of that that's been around for a really long time, but it seems like it has both been successfully resisted in the past, but also on its own terms has never really been particularly successful or particularly durable. And I think in part it's because the art that they tend to make is just is not really good on its own terms. I don't know what you think about that, like in the context of that longer history of attempts to infiltrate subcultures, right? Or, I don't know, make music, right? I don't know. I mean, you might have some better context than me, actually.
Just in relation to culture, I just think it's interesting that these attempts are constantly being made, and I guess the more attempts that are made, and these seem to be reasonably well financed, the more likely some kind of formula might be hit upon which will enlarge that audience considerably. I guess that's their dream, and insofar as the far-right fascism appeals, it was previously quite capable of producing various forms of media and art that was spectacular and thrilling and motivated people. I'd say this as just being kind of baby steps towards the creation of that kind of, and also to absorb some kind of countercultural chic, whatever accrues to someone who's a bit contrarian is one of the goals, I suppose.
Yeah, it seems like that. I mean, they really are baby steps, though, because, like, in the case of Passage, Keeperman got to go on Ross Douthat's New York Times podcast. Back to the New York Times. Ross Douthat's a conservative columnist there, and he runs this podcast where I guess the idea he has is to talk to all these figures on the so-called new right? So he's had J.D. Vance on, he's had Peter Thiel on most recently, and yeah, he had Keeperman on. And they spent the whole time talking about Keeperman's ambition to sort of foster this new kind of right-wing artistic movement. But so far they've published Tacky is almost 90. Steve Saylor must be well into his 70s. Curtis Yarvin and Nick Land have each been around going on for a couple of decades now. I mean, all of these guys have been banging away at this stuff for decades. They're not new voices. They're kind of superannuated voices in some cases. It's not really, none of it's really art. I mean, Saylor and Tacky, it's both collections of stuff they've written that's been public for a really long time. And same with Yarvin and Land. Like, none of it's even new material. Most of it's kind of journalistic in a very broad sense of that word. It's kind of columns and stuff with Tacky. And Land is his own weird sort of genre, right? Like reactionary cultural theory, which doesn't have a mass appeal, I don't think. I mean, I don't think he's sold a ton of books in the past. So it seems like contradictory. Like, maybe it's trying to build a canon or something, but my God, that's a pretty bad canon. Like, it's just depressing. I mean, obviously I don't agree with the politics, but like, it's very sad. It's not my cup of tea. It's not my cup of tea, but it's also just, it's not new. It's not exciting. It's racist uncle kind of stuff. I don't know. Like, the vibe seems wrong. It certainly, whether it's my cup of tea or not, it's not. It doesn't seem to be something where it's revealing this kind of cultural momentum that they might have, right? It's kind of like Steve Saylor's blog posts since the history of Steve Saylor's blog posts. I mean, it's just kind of cruddy.
Jason, also not new or exciting, well, maybe a little bit exciting for them. The Old Glory Club is a organisation that you've recently reported on. What are these naughty chaps up to?
We're still in the realm of sort of, I don't know, we're still in the realm of intellectual pretensions here, I guess. So the Old Glory Club, okay, well, we'll start from here and work back. I found paperwork for 26 branches or chapters of this organization in 20 states. They seem to be concentrated in the Upper South, in Virginia and North Carolina. But yeah, they're a kind of network of fraternal lodges, men-only lodges. It seem to be coming up in my reporting a lot over the last couple of years. There's a umbrella organization. They have a Substack, and they have, each chapter really has an X account. They have a YouTube channel. They have a live stream. And what they're really doing, they're explicitly, they themselves connect themselves with, in the UK, a movement organization that Hope Not Hate had a really big expose on a couple of weeks back, called the Basket Weavers. So basket weaving, for those who don't know, is the euphemism du jour for in-person meetups. I think the white stuff guys used to talk about pool parties, right? So this is kind of the updated version of that is basket weaving. So it's a kind of innocuous sounding name for in-person meetups. The way Hope Not Hate, and they had an insider view because they had someone infiltrate that stuff in the UK. Harry Shookman is his name. I mean, he's done a lot of great work for them. The way he describes what they do is they have these kind of larger in-person events and these sort of media products that produce a slightly sort of sanitized version of their deal. And then once you get people to come along to in-person events, they get the kind of spicier version, so to speak. And that seems to be what's going on here as well. Though I don't yet have an insider account there, but watch this space maybe. Anyway, yeah. And so they have like podcasts and stuff, which are, to be clear, kind of racist and anti-Semitic on their face, but also sometimes cloaked in euphemism and a kind of reasonable sounding patter. Right. But then they also have in-person meetings. They have a national kind of conference and chapters have in-person meetings. And the rules about chapters appear to be quite strict. Like they seem to be under the financial and sort of moral, so to speak, supervision of the umbrella organization. And yeah, they kind of meet up and we don't really know exactly what goes on at the in-person meetups. Right. But they claim to be running the same kind of basket weavers model as the UK kind of version is. The reason that they can't maybe keep a lid on it in the same way that the public-facing element of it in the UK is the Lotus Eaters podcast. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but Hope Not Hate have a lot of good stuff on the people involved in that as well. And they really do present a kind of a reasonable face. Unfortunately for the Old Glory Club, their kind of media star, so to speak, is this podcaster by the name of Pete Quinones. And he's been at it since 2017. And he's a full-on Holocaust-denying, unapologetically, crudely anti-Semitic, Zionist occupational government spouting kind of a guy, right? Like he's older than most of these guys. Most of these guys that I'm talking about in the story are young, in their 20s, some in their 30s. Some elder millennials maybe, but Pete's, I think he's done a pretty good job at scrubbing himself online. I would estimate he's somewhere in his mid to late 50s. And yeah, I mean, he's doing their live streams and he's not hiding his light under a bushel, right? I mean, he did his own live stream the day after the US bombed Iran, where he was telling his listeners to boycott Jewish businesses and businesses run by Indians as well, and saying that you can't let Jews into your country, and if you do let them in, you have to kind of crack down on them. Just a full on. He's one of those guys who maybe went through that paleo-libertarian pipeline into just full-time anti-Semitism, but quite a long time ago. So yeah, I mean, if that's the mild version, no, I mean the in-person meetups must be quite something. But some of the guys I discovered, the Guardian only gives you so much space. The people I put named in the story tended to be people with security clearances, National Guardsmen, people who had worked as prosecutors, that kind of thing. And also Pete, I talked a little bit about, because he doesn't seem to have come up on anyone's radar. I'm not sure what the ADL's preoccupied with these days, but he seems like the kind of person who they might have once taken an interest in, but apparently they haven't. So, yeah, perhaps their eyes are on something else at the moment. But, yeah, I'd say that there's plenty of anti-immigrant sentiment in the group, just in their public chatter. Plenty of pretty crude anti-black racism, including from Pete Quinones. I think I detailed some of that in the story. But their central preoccupation appears to be they also have a neo-Confederate vibe, and they talk a lot about the Civil War and offer some sort of revisionist history on that. But the central kind of deal, I would say, is anti-Semitism, Holocaust revisionism, explicitly anti-Semitic versions of the Great Replacement. And it's not like active clubs. I mean, these guys have, as I said, intellectual pretensions. It's more of a talking shop. I don't think they're going to get kinetic anytime soon, although who knows? It just takes one guy in a country with hundreds of millions of firearms. But that's not my impression. So it's a little different from that. These guys, maybe they went to college or at least for a year or two. And so it's more of a, they're trying to, I've got stuff in the story to this effect. They're trying to kind of self-consciously sort of assemble an anti-liberal worldview that represents the interests of what they call heritage Americans. So white man. There is, of course, the obligatory levels of anti-feminism and misogyny as well. But yeah, the grand synthesis that they've come up with so far is a kind of series of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, anti-Semitic myths about Jews being the principal adversary of heritage Americans, and Jews being the architects of liberalism and the architects of mass immigration and the architects of civil rights, which they interpret as sort of, and the architects of U.S. foreign policy, sort of U.S. pro-Israel foreign policy. And they interpret all of that as an attack on white American men that's unfolded over decades and maybe centuries, right? Like this is the sort of central drama of history, if you like. So that's where they're at. I mean, it goes without saying that none of them are as smart as they think they are. that anti-Semitism like that is just sort of cognitive poison, right? Because it just sees you attributing all of your personal problems and all of society's problems to the malign influence of Jews, right? Their account of foreign policy is just stupid. I mean, the US pursues its own interests, right? For better or worse. And, their account of mass immigration and civil rights obviously writes out the agency of African Americans in attaining their own civil rights. It obviously writes out the perhaps temporary renunciation of the worst forms of racism by the American state, or whatever you want to say. It's reconfiguration of it into other stuff like mass incarceration. But like the achievements of the civil rights movement and the repeal of explicitly racist immigration laws, both of which happened in the mid-60s, have affected a ton of people's lives for the better, even if the other more covert forms of racism have persisted. But that's how these guys see history. That's how they see the present. And that's the problem with everything they say. It's all pretty stupid stuff. But I was talking to someone, got in touch with me, an academic. I won't name him, although he didn't ask me not to, but it's just not important for the purposes of this conversation. But he's an academic researcher who's been looking at these guys for a while. He's just been listening to their stuff for a while. And I don't know if you've noticed, certainly when I unmasked Lomez, when I identified him, they tried to, and I'm not. They say that what I do is doxing, and it's not. I don't publish anyone's address, and I only ever kind of report on people's names and stuff where it's in the public interest and where it's relevant and where they have some power and where they're trying to make things happen, right? I'm not just randomly publishing the names of Old Glory Club foot soldiers or whatever. I'm not saying that other people who might do that would be wrong to do so, but that's not what I'm doing. But they say what I'm doing is doxing. But they've tried to kind of meme into existence this idea that doxing doesn't matter anymore, especially in the new Trump era. Like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect them. If anything, it's good. It's a good thing, like, for them to be identified, which is like raises the question of why they don't just all de-anonymize tomorrow, right? But anyway, and I don't know if these guys have been lulled by those kind of conversations. I mean, they went ahead and set up these branches and put their names and addresses in the paperwork, right? And they've gone quiet now. But I think what I was talking to this person about was, I don't know, with Twitter being as botted, or X being as botted as it is, with it being such a hothouse of far-right kind of ideology, with very few safeguards, with no accountability as to what's said on there, with no real controls on, as I said, automated stuff, where people can have no real idea about how many of their followers are real people. I just wonder if these guys have, I mean, the kind of cognitive bubbles that can form on there that might lead you to sort of think that you can set up a kind of branch of a neo-Confederate anti-Semitic organization and put your name on it, and people won't look into that. And if they do, there won't be any consequences. It just seems kind of really bizarre. It seems like what's happening on X at the moment in a lot of these subcultures is that people are constructing their own reality, and and the reality they're constructing is just not sustainable. I would say. I don't know. It's really weird. I don't know how much you guys are observing what's going on X these days, but yeah, we were just talking about the kind of really pronounced sort of cognitive and ideological bubbles that happen on there, which people seem to get surprised when they're reminded at how at variance their political ideas are from just kind of like the average person, right? like I think that for most people, a lot of the taboos around anti-Semitism have disappeared. But like when most people encounter raving anti-Semitism, it seems at least really weird to them, right? Like to the sort of median person, even if the median person in the US, say, is kind of center right, like that kind of rhetoric is just very strange and very alarming to a lot of people. And I think on X now, a lot of people seem to forget how extreme even the sort of specifically designed, sanitized version of their rhetoric is, how strange it seems to other people. I don't know. I don't know if I've expressed that very well. I don't know if it's something you've observed, but it just seems like X is not good for these guys.
No, I think sometimes they get a little high on their own supply. And like that, they I guess if you're so self-assured that you're on the right path, it might not occur to you that you sound like an absolute lunatic the minute you speak to a normal person, but they do.
They totally do. It's and they can't even, that vocabulary they have about hiding your power level. Like it's like they've lost the ability to do that. Or that X erodes the ability for people to do that just because.
I saw just on X yesterday, like Grok, the AI, when asked who runs Hollywood, has got a few ideas about it. So it's baked into the code now of the platform, the anti-Semitism. There's no need to hide your power level on there.
Well, not on there, but that platform is smaller and more niche by the day, right? And those guys, presumably, some of them still have jobs that they have to do in order to pay the rent and feed themselves, right? They still have friends and family. I mean, that's the big thing that they really underestimate, I think. They're going to have friends and family, maybe even conservatives. who are just not going to be cool with this, right? They're not going to understand. They're not going to be able to understand why they're pursuing this, because it is hard to understand. I mean, it is hard to understand from my point of view. Because, and I mean, I say that X is getting smaller, and that these guys seem deeply weird, maybe even to a lot of conservatives. But the other side of that is that this kind of grassroots, or whatever we want to call it, this grassroots fascist movement, which is international, doesn't seem to be getting smaller, right? It seems to be getting bigger, even if the tools that they have access to are not helping them as much as they used to, and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, it could still absolutely ruin your life if it's disclosed that you're a member of a group like that. And it just seems like a very odd time in that sense. Like, I don't know that the Trump administration is not going that well, right? It's not going that well. And I don't know, I'm not going to say that like Zoran Mamdani is going to ride to the rescue and his presidency is going to usher in a Swedish democratic socialism in the US. Like, I don't think the US is going to be good anytime soon. But I'm just saying that, like, it doesn't seem like that some version of this movement is going to hold unchallenged power in the US either. I mean, they're going to be opposed to some degree. And sometimes they're going to be opposed by the state, right? And so, but they seem to have lost sight of that somehow. I don't know. I don't know if I'm reading too much into it. It just seems really weird to me, I guess, is the main thing.
Well, luckily we have you, Jason, to help alleviate them of any doubts they might have about whether having their name attached to their ideas helps or hurts them. If people want to read more of your work, you're on The Guardian, you're on Blue Sky. Do you want to plug any other outlets?
Maybe next time. I'm going to launch a newsletter, but I'll save the details for next time.
All right. jasonwilson.substack.com, soon to come. Maybe not on Substack.
Yeah, it could be. I just want the one that is going to let me buy the most groceries.
Andy, just before we go, we have a few people that we need to thank as regards the recent 3CR Radiothon.
We do, Cam, and we had many people make donations, so thank you very much, including Sean.
Yes, Amy.
Juliet.
Paul.
James.
Ian.
Andrew.
David.
Paul.
Robert.
Joseph.
Teresa.
Eamon.
Jay.
Anu.
Andre.
Yes. Jason.
Aidan.
Satan.
Yeah, you saved the best one for yourself. I believe it's actually written here as Satan.
Sorry. Satan.
Melissa.
Julie.
Peter.
Naomi.
Derek.
Amy.
Lachlan.
Noka.
Gary.
Kev.
Kenneth.
Nathan.
Cam.
John.
David.
Aurelian.
M.
Sharon.
Another Cam.
Another Cam, yes. John.
Nick.
Ben.
Stephen.
Kieran.
Paul.
Ben.
Yet another Cam.
Yes. A Tasman.
A Haley.
Jackson.
Ian.
Susan.
Daniel.
William.
Marcus.
Joe.
Darren.
Another Cam.
Yep, yet another one. I would say in years past, Andrews have dominated. This year it's the year of Cams. Thomas. Callum.
Andrew.
Yeah, so only two Andrews. Well, and an Andre. Lee.
And Eloise.
And Mel.
Yes, thank you so much.
And Music Matters as well. I'll throw
yes.
in there. Yes, thank you to everyone. We had a goal of raising $3,000, and thanks to all of you, we raised $5,264, which is well above the goal. It's precisely what I said not to do, but we'll leave that aside. What's done is done.
It is.
We'll be back next year asking you for even more, so that's look forward to that. That's on you. Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you. Okay, bye.
Keffiyehs are Palestinian scarves, and they're a symbol of support for justice for the Palestinian people. From the traditional black and white keffiyeh to an array of modern designs, it's Explore the range and order online or drop by 3CR during business hours. We're your support for the rights of Palestinians. Go to kufiyas.org.au, that's KUFIYAS.org.au. A 3CR supporter.
Public transport's great.
What's not great is that unless you've got a radio with you, you can't listen to 3CR when you're on it.
Until now. The Community Radio Plus app lets you listen to us wherever you are.
Get on board and search Community Radio Plus wherever you get your apps.